Hi, my name is Jim Hayes, and I'm here to talk about sales excellence in the customer-driven economy. And like most good salespeople, I'm going to set the appropriate levels of expectation. And the expectation you should have is just one. I'm going to make one promise, and the promise is that I won't do this to you. Okay? Why I won't be doing that to you is because I'm not going to stand up here and try and be a sage on the stage. My job up here is to really get you to think, and to think different. Not just about how we sell, and we all know sales is very, very important, but the most important person in all of our businesses is the customer. And we're going to be talking a lot about the customer and focusing on that piece of it. And as George and Patrick and Peter and all the rest of the executives at Harmonic have talked about, your customers are going through a massive level of change. The entire industry is going through incredible levels of change right now. For one, in all the technologies, going from multiple protocols, going from standard and high definition up to ultra high definition to converged platforms, a focus on not just CapEx, but moving to OpEx, not just on-premises solutions, but cloud services and infrastructure as a service, and from hardware to software. In addition to all those changes in the technology aspects of it, there are huge shifts taking place in the way customers buy as well. This is in massive transition, and again, as George talked about, moving from, again, CapEx to TCO, moving from the fact that if you wanted information about Harmonic's products, you had to talk to a Harmonic salesperson or a Harmonic partner. Today, salespeople just give it an RFP, respond to the RFP. And most importantly, the channels were there mostly to provide fulfillment today, and many of you have already gone past that level. We really need to position ourselves as full service providers and to really be there as a trusted advisor. So part of what we're talking about is this level of change that's going to be required in the marketplace. The problem with all this change is the only person that really likes change is a wet baby. And for the rest of us, it's a pretty darn scary proposition. As George mentioned, he's taking his internal Harmonic sales force, the direct sales force, through a pretty massive set of changes in his expectations. Moving from product discussions to customer business issues, moving from just feature-led product discussions to a much richer set of architectural discussions around solutions. So with all that change taking place, the question is probably less about what we need to do, because it's clearly outlined here from George's perspective. The real question is, how do we actually do that? What is it we actually have to do differently? And a lot of people think this is about learning something new, learning something different. I'm going to suggest it's probably less about learning than it is the more difficult challenge of unlearning. What do I mean by unlearning? Let's take a common example. Almost everybody believes that the customer is king. Ask yourself, is the customer king? I'm going to suggest the answer is no. Now, the customer is not just king, they're actually a dictator. And the reason they're a dictator is because they have all the power. Before, if that customer wanted information about Harmonic's product, they had to talk to someone within the channel. Say, look, what do you know about Harmonic? What can you tell me? Today, before your salespeople even show up to talk to that customer's already gone onto the internet and done their research on the internet. Not only do they know about Harmonic's products, but they've also done the comparisons with all the other products, whether it's Cisco or Eris or anybody else in the industry. They've done all those comparisons. And in many cases, because of the power of social networking, they've actually gone on to their social network and go, hey, didn't you buy some Harmonic channel port boxes the other day? Can you tell me how much you paid for them? They'll know all that before your salesperson even shows up. So there's been this massive shift. They've done all the comparisons, in most cases, about 2/3 of the time, before they ever talk to one of your salespeople. So the question then becomes, if the customer has become the dictator, and again, the difference between a king is someone you serve. A dictator is someone who tells you how you're going to serve them. If they've got all that power now, how do we deal with that kind of world? So what I'd like to do is a brief demonstration, and I'll need a volunteer. James, would you be willing to help me?
I sure would.
Okay. What I'd like you to do is stick your right arm out, and as much as your range of motion will allow, put your palm perpendicular to the floor,
okay.
Up like that, okay? And just hold that position.
Okay.
Okay, what was that about besides me behaving a little strangely in this presentation? Did I ask him to push? Did I ask you to push?
No.
Okay. When I started pushing, what did you do?
I pushed back.
And I pushed harder.
And I pushed harder.
And I pushed really, 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 really hard. And here's the problem. How many wrestling matches do we ever win with a customer? The answer to that's probably obvious. None. Notice one other thing that happened. Push. Okay. If I stop pushing, sorry about that. If I stop pushing, which way does he go? Away from me or closer to me? And again, the answer is obvious. If we stop going from this push model to a pull model, the customer has an opportunity to actually come closer to us. Okay? Just one more time, again, to make the point. Both hands. Okay? I push really hard, and all I get is resistance. I pull, and he comes a lot closer to me. Thank you for that, James. Appreciate it, sir. Okay? So here's the thing. This whole presentation, to a large degree, is about one fundamental thing. How do we go from the traditional push model that all of us in sales have been taught to a model that's more appropriate when the customer has the power in the relationship? Now, how do we move to pull? It's pretty easy to figure out that that's where we have to go. The real question is, why aren't we already doing it? And as JP Rangaswamy, who's the Chief Technology Officer and Scientist at Salesforce.com, a company that knows a great deal about this shift in buying behaviors, moving to the cloud, for instance, he said, I've heard talk about companies becoming customer-centric for decades now. And most of the time, it's been lipstick on a pig. Too often, people find it hard to put themselves in the shoes of their customers. Now, JP's not the only person who brought this out, but why, if we're all smart people, and we are, why do we find it so hard? And I'm going to suggest it's because most of our organizations have been built from the inside out. We have something we're good at, we have products, we have services, we have solutions, and we're going to push those solutions out into the marketplace. And that's been the business model for over 100 years in the Western world. So the question becomes, you know, if we can no longer push, we've got to learn how to create pull. We've got to really stop thinking inside out and start thinking outside in. And I will highly recommend this work. It was done by Forrester Research, two people there, Harley Manning and Carrie Bodine. And they did a lot of looking at the power of an organization that can actually put its customers at the center of the business, not their products, not their offerings, not their solutions, but customers. And figure out what do we have to integrate to make sure that customer gets the best experience possible. Why am I recommending books like this that are focused more on the business side? Because it's those insights, as George talked about this need to move towards insight selling, it's these insights that will allow us to move from product-dominated discussions to customer business issue-dominated discussions. Again, from just talking about features and functions to really moving up and saying what kind of architectures do you need to support the kind of business capabilities you're trying to acquire. Now, you may be saying, well, hey, we're already pretty good at that. We already know how to sell solutions. Okay, maybe. Here's what I'm going to ask. Most of you have children, many of you have children, and your children get report cards. Let's do this. Let's take a look at the report card that those of us in the technology sales arena get. In other words, what do customers think of our ability to really be customer-centric in their eyes? Again, this work was done by Forrester several years ago, and they ask a simple question, right? How do you perceive your interactions with vendors? So when you talk with a vendor salesperson, how would you characterize their agenda and the interactions that go on? The good news is this is not just a US-centric report. As you can see here, this was done in the UK, in Germany, and France, as well as the US. And unfortunately, the results were rather consistent. There were some minor variations, but they're pretty consistent across the board. The first question they ask, they only want to tell me about their products and services. And if you think about this, would you want this to be high or low? This is one you would want to be low. You want to make sure that the customer believes you're talking about more than just your products and services. And it really was low. So it was, I would say, a passing grade, a little iffy in the UK, but certainly a passing grade in Germany and in France. The next question was about this statement where they said, okay, the salesperson listens for a keyword or two so they can launch into a prepared elevator pitch about how they relate to that topic. Now, would you want this to be high or low? This one you'd want to be low. And unfortunately, This is not a passing grade. The next question, they are legitimately interested in trying to help us understand how their products or services would work in our situation. Again, this is one where you want the answer to be high. And again, look how low it is, 15, 24, 17, and in the US, 17. The next one, they try to understand our challenges and offer suggestions, even if they don't sell those products or services, for us to address our challenges. Now this is the mythological consultative salesperson. You're more likely to walk out of this conference and see a unicorn walking down the street than to see a consultative salesperson. Here's what customers felt the likelihood of that was. 7, 2, 6, and again 6 in the US. That is incredibly low. People don't actually believe that salespeople are operating in their best interest. They believe they're operating in their company's best interest. And it really is the case in most organizations. Last but not least, they are genuinely interested in partnering with us to make sure that our initiative is successful. They really care about our business outcomes and partnering with us to make that happen. Again, you'd want this to be high or low? Obviously high. Again, if you look at the results, they're pretty sad. 4, 10, 15, and again, 15 in the US. So what's interesting is that, and I won't spend too much more time on this one because the goal is not to depress anybody. This is actually pretty good news because in your organization, you don't have to do it perfectly. You don't have to be perfectly customer-centric. You just have to be better than the competition. And the good news is the competition's terrible at it. So the real requirement here is just almost basically to suck less than your competition. If you look at a slightly different spin on this, that was what customers perceive. This slide talks about what do buyers want? And the question that was asked was, what qualities make a vendor a strategic value-added provider? And I won't go through each one of these. I'm just going to focus on the top two. The top two questions were, understand our business, our culture, and how to help us execute on those requirements. The second one was, focus on helping us realize an end result, to achieve a specific desired business outcome. Both of those are basically about help us be successful, help us execute, help us get the results we want. And if you look at that, that's anywhere from roughly about 50% to 2/3 of the people said that was the singular most important thing that they wanted from a strategic value-added provider. Again, the demand is absolutely there. Customers are looking for this. They don't feel they're getting it. And that is the opportunity for real differentiation. So what's the goal? What would I hope that you can walk out and start focusing on when you leave this conference? There are three. What we call the 3 pillars of sales excellence. And I'll go through them in order. First and foremost, what do we need to be great at? We need to start being better at opportunity creation, not reacting to a request from the customer, but helping the customer see what they can't see, to actually create the opportunity. The second one, how do we achieve meaningful differentiation? Now, if you notice, I said meaningful. Why did I say meaningful? First of all, who defines meaningful? Harmonic, your CEO, or the customer? That should be self-evident. The third pillar, the thing that is important and it isn't being done virtually at all in even the high-end consulting companies is come back after the sale and help me see that I got the promise of the kind of results and outcomes that you said I would get when I signed that purchase order. In other words, validating business impact. So again, those 3 in order were opportunity creation, meaningful differentiation, and validating the business impact. So if we talk about the first one again, going back to opportunity creation, all of you in this room has been incredibly successful. That's why you're being invited to this particular conference. You're the best of the best. Success has taught us that this is what the customer's buying. The real customer, not the people in the video or IT departments who get the budget, but the people who set the budgets. Those people aren't buying that. What they're buying is something different. But again, our sales success will tell us, no, they're buying boxes. Yeah, that's what you get as a purchase order for the box, but what the customer's looking for is something very different. A gentleman from Vienna, Austria, who immigrated to the United States about 80 years ago, by the name of Peter Drucker from Vienna, Austria. He said, And if you're not familiar with Peter Drucker, he wrote 54 different books on business theory, business management, innovation, and probably the world's premier thought leader around business innovation. What he said was, what the customer buys and considers value is never a product. It's always the utility, that is the use of it, what the product or service does for a customer. So even beyond selling products and even beyond selling solutions, what is it the customer is really looking for? The people who set the budgets, who allow an opportunity to even exist, want better business results, period. And that's the focus we've got to go on. It's our ability to look out and use our vision and our insights to see what they can't see and help pull that together. That's the real ability we have to add value to their organizations. Most of us are familiar with left brain and right brain. The left brain is the linear, logical, it sees the parts, it sees bits and bytes. That's the part of our brain that we've used to really sell in this industry. But if you think about it, this entire industry is about creativity and visuals and color and concepts. And we've taken this very left brain approach in a very right brain industry. I think all of us in this room can be even more successful if we start taking a more creative approach to how we're selling. And that's exactly what George suggested, that we need to move beyond products and even solutions to solutions and insight. And this shift, moving from basically a product focus to solutions and insight, is really at the heart of how you're going to be able to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. Again, let's take a real world example. BBC does not necessarily want to buy Ultra HD. They're not really interested in 4K. What they're really interested in is how are they going to get more mind share and more market share than ITV. So let's use a real practical example about how we might approach this business differently. And what I'm going to describe is something called the waterfall model. I said waterfall, not waterfly. If you think about it, at least here in the US, I'm assuming it's true in Europe as well, water doesn't go very well uphill. It flows rather easily downhill. The problem for almost all of us is that we're trying to take that product and push it up to make it more relevant on an architectural level or a business level, instead of starting with the business outcome. Look, ITV, you're trying to get more mind share and market share than the BBC. What kind of capabilities do you need to make that happen? And stop. Talk about that piece. Help bring that out. Not just with the technical people in the video acquisition group or in purchasing or even IT. It's getting to the station managers. It's getting to the broadcast managers, getting to the people that have to deliver those better business outcomes and helping them see what kind of capabilities they need to do that. You could have a discussion about, look, if you're trying to get news stories out faster and make them more compelling, what would you have to do that? Would you need a more compelling visual story that maybe Ultra HD could deliver? Do you need faster workflows? And what does it take to really optimize those workflows? Once they agree those are the capabilities they need, then you can move down to a discussion about an architecture, which is just a plan. How are you going to make that happen? Because you're going to have existing systems in place to do that. How can you put together an architectural framework that allows those new products and solutions to be pulled into that framework? And once they understand that plan or that architecture, then they'll be interested in talking about the products. Instead, most of us are trying to push those products. I'm going to suggest it's much, much easier to pull those products downhill than trying to push them uphill. Next one, we talked about meaningful differentiation. And one of the things that impressed me about Patrick, even though he's an engineer in terms of his background, he's a very smart CEO. In my opinion, he's nailed this. He said commercialization is becoming as important as innovation. And what I'd like to share with you, because many of us have strong technical and engineering backgrounds, may not be convinced that's true. What I want to share with you is the results of a 10-year benchmark study on the 10 types of innovation. In other words, how are you going to achieve meaningful differentiation in the marketplace? And this research was done by a group called Doblin, which was acquired by the Monitor Group, which was recently acquired by Deloitte, which many of you will be familiar with Deloitte. And in this study, they looked at 10 types of innovation. So what I want to do is show you where companies are spending their resources, budgets, euros, headcount, focus, time, energy, all those possible resources and where they're putting them. And what's interesting is they found on a scale of 1 to 10, the product itself, let's say a channel port, gets the vast majority of those resources. The product portfolio, the product system, or the product architecture, if you will, got about half of those resources. The services got about half of those resources. But those three subcategories, those 3 out of the 10 buckets, basically got the lion's share of the resources. If you look at channel, and again, got more than service, I know that matters to a lot of you in this room, get more than service, but considerably less than product and product system. Brand, pretty important, it's about the same as services, and customer experience, which you think would be vitally important, actually gets the least out of those 2 subcategories. Process, both the enabling processes and the differentiating processes, what he called core processes, got lesser resources than those other 2 categories. What's interesting is business model got the least resources, and networking got a little bit more than that, but the second least resources. So out of 10, business model was number 10 last, and networking got a little bit more than that. Now again, this is the inside out view, the inside out perspective, where I'm going to take my resources and invest them so that I can achieve meaningful differentiation in the marketplace. What's interesting is, if you look at it outside in, what is it that customers saw as the most important things that they valued, that they saw as meaningfully differentiated? So I'm going to show you that slide now. I call the difference between these 2 slides the definition of corporate insanity. Okay? This is the corporate view. This is the customer view. Those 2 slides couldn't be more different. Again, I'm going to go back. If you look at the one that got the most investment, it was product. And if you look at what had the least difference, it was product. So the product, product's important, of course it's important, but the product just has to be good enough from the customer's perspective. You can over-engineer and overbuild it to a point where people aren't interested. Now, I'm not here at a Harmonic conference to suggest that products aren't important. They're vitally important, as all of you know. The problem is, it's not enough in terms of differentiation. The things that got the least investment were the ones that had the greatest difference, and that was business model innovation, which is what George and Patrick have talked about, this shift, all these different changes that George has been talking about, and networking. Now, what do we mean by networking? First of all, it has nothing to do with Internet protocol. It does have to do with partnering. So why did partnering essentially get, and when I say partnering, this is where 1 + 1 = 3. Synergy, or the German word Gestalt. Why is that such an important differentiator in the marketplace? Again, we'll go back to Peter Drucker. One of the things that Peter Drucker said, and I'll just, before I explain what Drucker's view on this is, if you think about it, haven't most the easy problems been solved in business? In this industry, have the easy problems been solved? Sure. What's left? What's left are the really complex, difficult problems. And the problem is that there's no one of us that has all the smartest people in the world, that has all the answers to all the problems. And that's why Peter Drucker said, to give your customers what they need, you must follow 2 rules. Rule number 1, you must do only what you do best. In other words, play to your strengths. For the other things that the customer needs beyond your strongest capabilities, you must collaborate with other players who can complement your strengths with what they do best. So yes, you're a partner of Harmonic. I'm going to suggest, even as a partner of Harmonic, you have to learn how to partner with others that can bring the full range of the customer's needs together and integrate that. That will be your biggest differentiator. So again, I want to just go back and emphasize that looking at business model innovation and looking at partnering innovation is probably your best opportunity to achieve meaningful differentiation. And again, if you look at some of the points that were made earlier by George in his presentation, that last one in particular, going beyond fulfillment of here's a product, right, and moving to a full service provider. There's a lot of complexity there, and that complexity is going to require for us to be trusted advisors is to really look at not just what we offer, but what does the customer need? How do we partner to make that happen? Last but not least, we said there was a need, this third pillar, to really focus on measuring in real terms what was the business impact that the customer was looking for, and coming back after the fact and measuring, did that happen? A lot of people consider themselves value sellers, but in the workshops that we've done with clients all over the world, we've asked the executive teams and sales and marketing teams, define value. Your teams are value sellers, define value. And what's been interesting is they have a really difficult time. They'll come up with a variety of answers, but if you basically look it up in Wikipedia or in a dictionary, the word value is basically related to a comparison of two things, what they have to give and what they get in return. This comparison of gives and gets, all of us see value when we get a lot and we just have to give a little to get it. The problem with almost all of us in sales is that we'll provide a very detailed quote on what they have to give us. What we don't do is help the customer really understand what they get. So when we say we're selling value, we can't really sell value if we're not helping the customer see both of those. We don't necessarily have to do it, but we have to make sure that it gets done. The comparison of gives and gets. And again, I'm going to come back to, it's not just the money that we want to get from them that we need to show them. They need to see what kind of results they're going to get. And again, I'll emphasize this was a report that was done by Gartner. I know many of you are dealing primarily today with video people. One of the things George has emphasized is the industry is moving so that more and more IT people are involved. The head IT person is a chief information officer. What's interesting is they surveyed CIOs and said, what do you see as the most important thing that will provide you with success and influence in your organizations? What was interesting was these top 4 were all about the business. Business results or business outcomes, business knowledge, my understanding of the way the business runs as a CIO, C-level relationships within the business, and the relationships below there. IT or technical related issues were the bottom 4. IT knowledge, IT relationships, the authority that's invested in the CIO. And what was interesting was almost all of us believe relationships are important, and they are, but they're not differentiators. They're table stakes. You have to be able to form good relationships with your customers, but it is not a differentiator. They don't need you for a relationship. They have husbands and wives and children and uncles and aunts and mothers. They don't need you for a relationship. They need you for the top piece, better business results. And that's what we've got to start doing a better job of delivering against. The question is, how can you even prove that you delivered results if we don't come back and actually help them see in real terms, in real numbers, what kind of results they're getting? For instance, if you just ask the standard salesperson, what is a real business case? What comprises a compelling business case? We found that very few of them can come even close to this one. There are a couple different views on this one, but I'll show you the one that we advocate, and it has 7 requirements. So this is kind of the 7 rules of what it takes to create a compelling business case. It starts with the real change in business outcomes that the customers are looking for. The next thing is to be able to say, what's the targeted future state? What do you have to look like in the future if you're going to get better business outcomes? And then you have to contrast it with where they're at. So A, where they want to be, and B, where they're starting from. The difference between A and B is the next piece. It's a detailed transition plan. How do I get from my as is to my as desired? The 5th piece is, what's the total business impact? In other words, what are the gets? What are the things I'm going to get if I move from where I'm at to where I need to be? And the other piece is, you don't get something for nothing. What are the inquired investments that I'll have to make? And as we'll see in a bit, risk is the most important aspect that needs to be considered by a customer before they're going to write a purchase order. So this balanced risk, and I say balance because it's not just the risk of doing the project, it's also the risk of not doing the project. With those 7 pieces, the business customer can make a better business decision. The problem is we never really provide this. It's usually just a quote. And again, in the real world, I can tell you I've talked to executives from Accenture, and I say, how often do you go back and actually help the customer see what they got from the investment they made with you? It was interesting. I had that conversation with someone, an executive in the south of France. We were meeting via telepresence. I was in the US, he was in Marseille. And I asked him, I said, how often does Accenture do this? And here was his answer. He looked down. He didn't even answer me. He knew this is something they should be doing, but they weren't doing it. So I'm going to show you something we call, with a bit of fanfare and a wink, we call it the most important slide in the whole wide world of professional selling. Why? For one simple reason. It's how customers buy. So that's the slide. It's a little confusing, so if you don't mind, I'm actually going to get rid of all the complexity and start with a few simple concepts and build up so you can really understand what is it that goes through the customer's mind as they're going through their buying journey. This work was originally done 25 odd years ago by a social scientist in the UK who actually migrated to the US based on a project he was doing for two major vendors at the time, IBM and Xerox. And what he found is customers go through three distinct phases as they're going through their purchasing decision. The first phase he called need development. The second phase was called evaluation, and the final phase, phase 3, was called commitment. And he looked at these three stages and he decided that these were occurring over time, but it could be 5 seconds or it could be 5 years. The other aspect he looked at on the vertical axis was what was really top of mind. What was the buyer concerned with as they went through this process in 4 different key categories. The first one was needs. What are my needs? And that obviously is important up front, but once I figure out what my needs are, it's not that it's not important, it's relative to the other things I'm thinking about, it becomes less important over time. Once I've figured out what my needs are, the second thing that will become important is proof that my needs can be met. And in the evaluation phase, it's, okay, I know what my needs are, but what's going to meet my needs? And this is where the customer will start looking at products, calling people up, doing research on the internet. And again, proof that those needs can be met is always important, but once they agree, yes, it can be done, then it becomes less and less important over time. The third one, and this will not be news to most of you, is cost. But if you notice, I'm going to back up. Needs started out as needs, ended up as needs. Proof that my needs could be met started out as proof and ended up as proof. If you look at this one, it's cost actually becomes something different. So what's the difference between cost and price? Cost is, can I afford it? In other words, if it's €1, I've got that in my pocket. If it's 10 billion euros, forget it. I'm never going to be able to afford that. But once I understand it's something in my budget that I can afford it, then the issue at the end, before I write a PO is, am I getting a good deal? So cost is, can I afford it? Price is, am I getting a good deal? So since all of us deal with cost centers, which is what video or IT typically is a cost center, and purchasing agents, price is absolutely the most important thing. Except I mentioned there were 4. So what's the fourth one? What's interesting is the fourth one in this final phase, just before the customer commits, the fourth one is risk. And risk is absolutely the most important thing at the very end, not price. The purchasing agent will tell you it's price. They're lying. The risk is that I could spend all this money and never get the business outcomes I was looking for. There's an old saying, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Right? It's a safe choice. Clearly, with #1 market share in so many different categories, Harmonic is a safe choice in this industry and why it's able to command the kind of price premiums that it's been able to command. Okay? So what I'm going to suggest, the difference between price and risk is something we call margin. Because when we let it be about price, we're getting beat up when that really isn't the real issue. The real issue for the people who are trying to achieve better business outcomes is the risk that I'll spend all this money and not happen. To give you a real-world example, the United States Air Force just invested about $1 billion over the last 5 years to get an ERP implementation running. That $1 billion, they just walked away from all of it. They might as well lit it on fire because that $1 billion has been walked away from. They've just decided it's too complex, we can't do it, we don't know how to make it work. Now you can imagine that CIO probably no longer has a job at the United States Air Force today. And these kinds of projects is why you have an opportunity to really move up to higher margin opportunities and to really get your, if you will, unfair share, not unethical, but unfair share of the marketplace by doing something fundamentally different and better, something that customers really want and aren't getting. On the bottom, people are really the most important piece in that first phase. And that's where you'll see people hire a Deloitte or a McKinsey because consultants can come in there and help them see what they can't see and do that initial work. In the second piece, the offering, the products and or services will be the most important thing. And again, at the end, in the third phase, what's important there is the company, because is it a solid company? Is it a company that's going to be there tomorrow, like Harmonic? Harmonic has solid financials. They've done a great job of managing their business. Why is that important to customers? Because they're going to be there tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. That minimizes risk for customers, and I don't believe we're getting full credit for that in the marketplace. When I say we, I mean Harmonic and all of you as channel partners. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity. And again, this is part of what George was talking about when he talked about this need to move beyond kind of product selling to solution selling and even beyond that to real insight selling. And if you'll notice, business is really the issue in almost all those around insight selling. Okay? So as we wrap up, I want to share one last story about what this looks like in the real world. So what I want to do is take you through kind of a life cycle, if you will, of value, where the customer actually sees not just what they have to give, but what they get. And what they get is better business outcomes. It all starts with that. So if you look at this life cycle, this circle starts with one specific thing, and it probably should end with that as well. I have a desire to achieve a specific business outcome. Again, going back to the BBC, I want to be able to maintain my market share against ITV, or vice versa. If I'm ITV, I want to be able to beat BBC. That would be my desired business outcome. Helping me see how I get that desired business outcome, envisioning faster workflows that can not only get the news out faster, but using fewer people and making it more graphically and visually compelling. Once I can start seeing that I'm going to be able to beat my competitor by going to Ultra HD, faster workflows, all those kinds of things, and again, using this model, if I start at the beginning, if you think about this, where's all the value? The real value in today's marketplace is not in the offering. It's actually in the thought leadership, the insight selling that George talked about. All those insights take place earlier than the evaluation. If I ask this group, and I apologize that I can't be there with you in person, but if I ask, where do you believe most of your sales efforts are taking place? Is it in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3? I believe the answer I've gotten back most times when I've asked that question has been probably phase 2, and unfortunately a fair number of them in phase 3 when the RFP has already been issued. Because when an RFP comes out, that customer is usually late phase 2 and probably early phase 3. And you look at it, where should we be coming in? I'm going to suggest there's a trick answer to that one. I'm going to suggest it's not even phase 1. Because the very best salespeople are, as I mentioned before, the first pillar was opportunity creation. They create the opportunity. In the high-end management consulting world, it's called a phase 0 engagement. The customer doesn't even know what their needs are yet, and we're already helping them see what they can't see. So these phase 0 engagements, I don't believe are happening often enough in technology sales. And I think it's the real key to how you begin that differentiation process, because if you're not setting that vision up front, somebody else is, and now you're playing their game instead of your game. Okay? So once we get to the end and the customer actually says, okay, I'm ready to write a PO, this is where the differentiation can come into play. So if you look at it, if my real desire is to get better business outcomes, and I don't believe I'm getting that, I don't believe that most salespeople are actually interested in helping me get better business outcomes. If you remember back to when we talked about the report card, this was the #1 thing that customers were looking for. Somebody who's going to help me make this project work. And not just at a technical level, at a business, at a functional level. If you look at it and you go back to Peter Drucker's comment about focus on what we're great at, look at what the customer needs, and how do we partner for the rest of that. That partnering piece is something we can do. We can say, look, I'm really good at video delivery infrastructure, but I'm not really good at creating a compelling business case and doing workflow schematics or whatever. Partner with somebody to go do that work. The very best salespeople, as George pointed out, are orchestrators. How do they pull together all the resources the customer needs to be successful, pull that consortium together, which would include the customer, and say, look, when we come back, if this is going to be a 9-month process, let's come back at the end of 9 months, after the PO's been signed, after the technology has been implemented, and all the blinky lights go on, the system's installed. That's when the customer now can start getting better business outcomes. So how do we help them with the actual adoption, the use, the execution on this at the end of this process, and come back and measure 9 months, a year, 6 months, whatever is agreed on by the consortium when the contract's signed. Use that as the differentiation to say, we're going to come back at the end of this and make sure you got the results. If you got the results, fantastic, high fives, I'm buying beers at the pub. If you got better results, that's terrific, because that'll fund your next level of innovation that you're looking for. If we got less than that, not as a blame game, right, but just as a what do we have to do to correct the deficiencies? How can we raise this up to the level of expectation that was set when the contract was signed? I believe coming back and actually validating the business outcomes that the business people were looking for will be one of the biggest differentiators. And it will set you up for the next opportunity. Everybody talks about being a trusted partner, but how can you be a trusted partner if you haven't helped me see that I actually got the results you told me I would get if I bought your stuff? Now, this desired business outcome being the start point and the end point, there's a name for this framework. We call it the BOLD Success Framework. And BOLD is an acronym, and the acronym stands for Business Outcome-Led Delivery. The business outcome-led is the piece of what business outcomes do you need to achieve and how are you going to do that. The delivery is actually coming back and helping the customer see in real qualitative and quantitative measures that they got the success they were hoping to get when they first started this process. So again, to repeat, as Patrick put it so eloquently, commercialization is becoming as important in innovation. And in some cases, it may be even more important than the innovation. Now, I can tell you, Patrick's not going to stop investing in innovation, and he shouldn't. In a market that's in tremendous state of flux like this market is, that product innovation is still important, but it's not enough. The real differentiation will come from not just what we sell, but how we sell it. So since I'm probably standing between you and Patrick or another one of the Harmonic executives, I want to say thank you for the time, and I'd like to grab just 60 more seconds to watch a short video.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So here's my hope. I hope you'll be one of the crazy ones. When you go back to your businesses after this conference is over, that you'll be a misfit, that you'll be a rebel, you'll be a troublemaker, and actually change the world. As this industry is going through tremendous flux, customers are looking not just for solutions, but also insights, and that you'll help deliver those insights, help them actually get the better business results they're looking for. If you'll do that, I believe you'll see not just the growth you were hoping for, but probably didn't even believe was possible. I think you'll see yourself go beyond that. So good luck, good selling. Thank you for your time.